By sunrise, the Capitol was eerily quiet, but a single chamber door creaked. No one had expected this. Inside, papers lay scattered. A resignation letter burned through the silence. The words themselves seemed to tremble, and no one could explain why. You've seen this before. A figure, once untouchable, now collapsing in plain sight. The media called it historic. The public called it shocking. But the real story hadn't even started. From the steps outside, the city lights reflected off wet asphalt. Diners opened. Coffee steamed. Commuters moved like ghosts. Everything felt normal, until it didn't. A single detail overlooked by the cameras shattered assumptions. A message on a phone, a whisper in a hallway. Someone knew more than they should, and then the first hints of drama emerged. Whispers of power, betrayal, hidden alliances. It wasn't about policy, it was about perception. And the cost of underestimating the storm, you know this feeling. That moment when certainty evaporates, when everyone you trusted suddenly looks different, when history itself seems to pause. At the center, a lawmaker with a legacy, a flaw, a secret wound. Childhood scars that never healed. Late-night highways crossed alone. Diners where decisions were made over burnt coffee. A contradiction between public bravado and private doubt. But something in them was shifting. They just didn't know what was coming. Reports trickled in. At first, routine. Then, anomalies. Details didn't align. Statements contradicted statements. The rules of the game were bending quietly underfoot. And here's the part almost no one saw. The resignation wasn't the end. It was the trigger. A single domino in a cascade no one was ready to witness. You felt this once, didn't you? The moment when control slips just enough to reveal chaos lurking beneath. Screens flickered across the nation. Voices sharpened. No one agreed on what was real anymore. But one thing became clear. The real danger wasn't change. It was who controlled the definition of normal. Outside, the wind carried a whisper. Freedom was fragile. Power was transient. And trust, the rarest currency, hung by a thread. So when your moment comes, what will you choose to see? What will you choose to believe? And maybe this is where everything begins again. The Capitol steps glistened under the early sun. A light drizzle fell, almost apologetic. Inside, the echoes of hurried footsteps bounced off marble walls. Security cameras caught movement, but not everything. You've asked this question too. What drives someone to leave power behind? Not scandal alone, not fear, something deeper. He wasn't always the figure the headlines portrayed. Once, a child scribbled plans on the back of school notebooks, a quiet ambition stitched with insecurity. Late-night TV shows flickered on in empty living rooms, offering glimpses of a world larger than the highways he grew up on. A city of lights and opportunity, and a city of secrets and shadows. You felt this once, didn't you? The tension of possibility, the thrill that maybe, just maybe, life could pivot on a single choice. And pivot it did. Small decisions became avalanches. A nod here, a handshake there, someone's confidence crushed, someone else elevated. By the time the resignation letter hit the press, the game had already changed. At first, the reports looked normal. The Capitol buzzed with routine announcements. But then a single detail fractured everything. A forgotten meeting note. A financial disclosure no one noticed. A whisper, they've been playing a different game all along. This wasn't about politics. It was about people. And the cracks spread quietly, almost imperceptibly, until the structure itself trembled. In diners miles away, citizens debated. In offices, aides whispered. Late-night highway lights passed over trucks carrying secrets unknown to the public, each of them connected by invisible threads, moving toward a confrontation no one could fully predict. The figure at the center, haunted, calculating, human, stood alone in a conference room, paper in hand, heart hammering. A private dream wrestled with public expectation. And then the rule shift. Suddenly, the resignation was no longer the headline. The drama that followed, subtle but sharp, revealed alliances bending, loyalties tested, Every statement contradicted the last. Every assumption questioned. You know this feeling? That quiet panic when reality shifts under your feet, when clarity seems impossible. When the lights flicker and someone whispers, "Not everything is as it seems." By sunset, the narrative had splintered. A storm of reporting, conjecture, and speculation raged, and still the most important detail remained hidden. What they called leadership was quietly fractured. What they called control was curated chaos. You've seen this before. You felt this once. And now the capital, the city, the nation itself stood at the edge of revelation, the first tremors of truth, and the first question, could anyone survive the coming storm? And maybe this is where the story really begins. By midday, the capital was humming with its usual rhythm, or at least it seemed so. Beneath the polished marble floors, a different story was unfolding. At first, everything looked normal. Committee meetings, press briefings, handshakes caught on camera, but then a subtle shift, a missed cue, a paused smile. Someone glanced at the wrong screen, and suddenly the illusion fractured. You felt this once, haven't you? That moment when routine collapses, when the ground you thought stable tilts beneath your feet. In a private hallway, a conversation carried like a whisper. You think they don't see it? They see everything. The figure at the center, sharpened by ambition, haunted by doubt, was realizing the rules had changed. Allies he trusted now questioned him. Enemies he underestimated were already moving. And the cameras, they captured only fragments. Reports arrived in bursts, anomalies stacked on anomalies. At first, aides tried to rationalize them. Then a single document shattered all pretense. A financial trail, a chain of favors, connections too neat to be coincidence. You know this feeling, that sting of understanding that you've been missing pieces all along, the realization that power isn't what it seems, and control is never permanent, and those who resonate with it become its unseen center. And maybe this is where everything begins again. Paper rustles with ghostly cadence, doors click shut with deliberate randomness, reflections fracture across walls, columns, and floors. Outside, the city moved on. Diners served lunch, highways carried commuters, late-night TV anchors debated trivialities. No one noticed the storm growing inside the Capitol walls. And here's the part almost no one saw. The figure's private fracture, not a scandal, not a betrayal, something deeper, a questioning of self, a moral pivot, a truth long buried in ambition's shadow. You can't control everything. Sometimes the system controls you. Pressure mounted. Every decision risked exposure. Every conversation hinted at deception. And yet the public remained unaware. The real danger wasn't in the headlines. It was in the unseen currents pulling the story toward chaos. Screens lit up, alerts pinged, voices sharpened, confusion spread. No one agreed on what was real anymore. And then a mini twist. A new actor entered the stage, quiet, calculating, bringing information that no one anticipated. The resignation? Merely the first move in a much larger game. You've seen this before. You've experienced the moment when everything you believed collapses into uncertainty. And in that collapse, truth becomes relative, and loyalty becomes a question. By evening, the Capitol felt different. Not broken, not safe, not stable. A moral pressure filled the halls. A single thought repeated in every mind present. The rules have changed, and the cost of being unprepared is everything. So when the lights dim, when the cameras stop rolling, and the world thinks the story is simple, remember this: chaos doesn't announce itself, it whispers, and then it consumes. And maybe the next revelation was already waiting. Night fell over the Capitol. Streetlights reflected in puddles. A lone security guard paused. And somewhere, in a quiet office, a screen blinked with information no one else was meant to see. You've asked this question too. How does a system so vast, so structured, hide its true function from those living inside it. The resignation had been public, the statements carefully crafted, the optics flawless. But beneath the speeches, beneath the headlines, something else was moving. A network of influence, whispers, and calculated silences. A system designed not to break, but to control perception itself. You felt this once, didn't you? That moment when you realized the rules were never the ones you were told. Documents, emails, and half-heard conversations converged into one undeniable pattern. What they called freedom was quiet dependency. What they called control was curated chaos. And the resignation, it was the spark, a trigger in a system already poised to shift. The figure at the center, ambitious, flawed, human, now understood the paradox. Public opinion mattered less than alignment with invisible forces. Every decision could be rewritten, reframed, reinterpreted. Every truth could be spun into its opposite. At first, aides dismissed the irregularities. Then the connections became impossible to ignore. A single event, perfectly orchestrated, an alignment of people, power, and circumstance that no one had consciously seen. And yet somehow everyone was complicit. You know this feeling? The creeping sense that reality is not what it seems. That systems designed to serve humans often end up serving themselves. In diners across the city, citizens debated imagined truths. Late-night highways carried officials home, unaware of the threads they were following. And behind closed doors, voices whispered, everything we believed was a partial story. The first emotional shock hit quietly, not a scandal, not a confrontation, a revelation of scale. The realization that no one individual, not even the most powerful, controlled the outcome entirely. The game had rules, yes, but the rules were invisible, shifting, and merciless. Screens flickered, footsteps echoed in empty corridors. A security camera caught the shadow of someone walking past a meeting room, unnoticed. Someone had already seen the pattern, and what they did with it would change everything. You've seen this before. The moment when the logic beneath the chaos finally emerges, when the whispers make sense, when the structure terrifying, elegant, and indifferent reveals itself. And here's the paradox. The figure who thought they controlled power was actually a node within it. Every act of defiance, every calculated move was part of the system's design to maintain equilibrium. The resignation, the drama, the whispers, all served a greater pattern, one no one could fully manipulate. By midnight, the capital had changed. Not physically, not publicly, but in the minds of those who saw the threads, everything felt altered. Every alliance questioned, every loyalty measured, every truth now fractured. So when the world celebrates simplicity, remember this: the system does not break, it bends, it adapts, and it waits for the next trigger, the next figure, flawed and human, to stumble into the pattern. And maybe the storm wasn't coming. Maybe it had already begun. The Capitol lights flickered. A storm had arrived, not outside, not in the weather, but inside the minds of everyone present. Voices rose and fell. Arguments erupted in corners. Allegiances cracked, then shattered. Every decision felt heavier, every word louder. No one agreed on what was real anymore. You've felt this once, haven't you? That pressure when certainty evaporates. When you realize the ground beneath you is not solid, but trembling, and the storm isn't a metaphor, it's a fact. At the center stood the figure, once confident, once untouchable, now staring at a reflection they barely recognized. Private fears surged. Childhood scars ached. Dreams, once guiding stars, now felt like weights. The resignation had been a signal. The drama that followed exposure of alliances, secrets, and hidden motives was the wave that finally broke the dam. It wasn't about politics anymore. It was about truth and identity. Screens glowed across the city. Citizens watched, debated, reacted, and the figure realized You can silence a voice. You can bury a truth. But you cannot stop a mind that finally learns to question. You know this feeling, the rush of clarity, and those who resonate with it become its unseen center. And maybe this is where everything begins again. Paper rustles with ghostly cadence, doors click shut with deliberate randomness, reflections fracture across walls, columns, and floors. The pang of loss, the excitement of realization, and the storm intensified. Every whisper became a shout. Every doubt became a challenge. Even allies turned against each other, not out of malice, but confusion. No one knew who to trust, and the figure at the center felt the weight of every decision, every misstep, every hidden motive. Then came the micro twist, a revelation that nothing was accidental. Every leak, every betrayal, every scandal, all curated, orchestrated, designed to test, measure, and manipulate. The resignation, a distraction. The chaos, controlled. And the people, powerless in their ignorance, were the ultimate audience. You've seen this before. You've experienced the shock when systems designed to serve humans turned to serve themselves. Pressure waves rippled outward, voices sharpened, screens lit up with conflicting stories. And still the truth remained layered, hidden beneath another layer, beneath another layer, beneath another. The figure's private awakening arrived slowly, painfully, not a headline. Not a public moment, but an internal revolution. They understood that power was not in holding office. Power was in perception, in narrative, in understanding the system. And that understanding came at a cost, identity itself. You've felt this once, haven't you? The moment when your own reflection becomes a stranger, when the world tests your every assumption, when the truth hurts. Outside, the Capitol rested in uneasy quiet. Inside, the storm raged. And in that chaos, a question lingered. What would you do when you realized everything you relied on, every rule, every trust, every expectation, was already part of someone else's design? And maybe this was the moment that defined the figure, the breaking point, the awakening, the storm that would never fully pass. Dawn arrived slowly. The storm had passed, or so it seemed. The Capitol was quiet. Marble floors gleamed under pale light. Footsteps echoed, careful now, and somewhere in a corner office, a figure sat alone, breathing. You've felt this once, haven't you? That fragile pause after chaos, when the world holds its breath, and you finally can too. The events of the past hours, resignations, whispers, hidden alliances, they had changed everything. Not the buildings, not the headlines, but the people who had lived through it. The figure understood something crucial. Freedom isn't inherited, it's practiced. Power isn't granted, it's perceived. And truth is layered, fleeting, and personal. You know this feeling. The quiet that follows tension, the reflection that arrives after the storm, the realization that what mattered most wasn't control, but understanding, not manipulation, but awareness. Across the Capitol, the city began to stir. Diners reopened. Coffee steamed. Commuters walked, unaware of the battles fought in their name. Highways carried engines and shadows. Life went on. And yet nothing would ever be the same. The figure stood by a window, looking at the city lights fading in morning. A private dream had shifted. A private fear had been confronted. A private truth had emerged. And then the echo, so when your moment comes, what will you choose to see? What will you choose to become when the system whispers, when power bends, when truth fractures? What will you carry forward? The resignation, the drama, the storm, they were markers. Not endings, but beginnings. You've felt this once, haven't you? The hush after chaos, the stillness after fire, the knowledge that the world continues, but you are changed. And maybe this is where everything begins again. Not for the headlines, not for the cameras, but for the people who finally learned to see. The city breathed in morning light, but inside the Capitol, something lingered. A residue of the storm, a quiet unease, not visible, not spoken, but felt. You've seen this before. That subtle shift when nothing seems wrong, but everything has changed. The figure returned to their office, desk cluttered with papers, phones, and half-read memos. A single envelope sat unopened. Its weight was heavier than any headline. Outside, reporters moved in waves. Cameras, microphones, flashing lights, all chasing the story everyone thought they already knew. But you know this feeling, don't you? The story they report is never the one you lived. And there was a pattern emerging. Small inconsistencies in schedules, statements, alliances, a network of forces converging quietly, like water carving stone over decades. At first, it seemed minor, then unmistakable. A single thread connected resignation to whispers, to subtle manipulations, to power far beyond the chamber doors. The tension rose. At first, almost imperceptibly, then, sharply, the rules were bending again. Allies shifted, opponents advanced, and the figure realized control was an illusion. The system, not the people, dictated outcomes. You felt this once, haven't you? The gnawing realization that everything you trusted was only partially true. And sometimes truth itself is a weapon. Alerts pinged across devices, screens flashed, a conversation recorded without notice, a message deleted too quickly, and still no one outside noticed. Inside the Capitol, moral pressure mounted. The figure wrestled with contradiction. Ambition versus conscience. Legacy versus truth. And for the first time, a question whispered louder than any command. Who am I if the system defines me? You know this feeling. The private reckoning hidden behind public performance. The weight of decisions no one will ever see. The realization that identity is fragile, especially when measured against perception. And then the mini twist. A new actor entered, not publicly announced, not televised, but crucial. A strategist, a fixer, a mind quietly shaping events, the resignation already fading from view. The real game just beginning. But you cannot stop a mind that finally learns to question. You know this feeling, the rush of clarity, and those who resonate with it become its unseen center. And maybe this is where everything begins again. Paper rustles with ghostly cadence, doors click shut with deliberate randomness, reflections fracture across walls, columns, and floors. By noon, the Capitol was alive with motion, but underneath, currents shifted. The storm had passed, but the tide was rising again. And maybe the true test was no longer survival. It was understanding who pulls the strings and who must choose to walk free. Afternoon sunlight cut through the tall windows, dust motes floated lazily in the beams, and yet the air inside the Capitol felt heavy, charged, like something was waiting to break. You felt this once, haven't you? That quiet anticipation when every instinct tells you something is coming. The figure moved from office to office. Each step echoed on marble floors. Each conversation carried double meaning. Every handshake, every glance, a test, a trap, a signal. At first, everything seemed routine. Press releases, committee updates, floor votes. But beneath the surface, rules were shifting. The resignation that had made headlines was already losing its grip. A new narrative began to form, one that contradicted everything the public had seen. Reports arrived, small inconsistencies stacked into patterns. Allegiances shifted quietly. A single aide's comment fractured an entire assumption. At first, it seemed minor, then unmistakable. The rules of the game were bending. You know this feeling. The gnawing unease that builds when logic no longer applies. When every familiar anchor is suddenly unreliable. Outside, diners hummed. Highways carried commuters. Late-night TV anchors debated yesterday's headlines. Unaware the real drama unfolded inside silent corridors, and then a disruption. A private memo leaked to the wrong inbox. A conversation recorded without consent. The system, meticulous, calculated, had faltered. And the figure realized no one was untouchable, not allies, not opponents, not themselves. The tension rose like a storm surge. Expectations shattered, assumptions dissolved, and for the first time, the figure's private fears collided with public scrutiny. A moral test, a question of identity. Who were they beneath the persona, beneath the headlines? You've seen this before. That moment when certainty fractures, and the mind grasps at fragments of understanding. Every decision carried weight. Every silence was dangerous, and yet clarity was just out of reach. At the center, a paradox emerged. Control was slipping, but only for those unaware of the underlying pattern. The resignation, the drama, the whispers, all part of a system designed to survive, no matter who fell or who rose. Screens flickered, voices rose. Every observer, hidden or public, felt the shift. The storm of perception collided with the storm of reality, and the figure human flowed. Awake, understood one truth. Sometimes the system wins not by force, but by bending the world to its invisible rhythm. And maybe this was the point of no return, where chaos meets clarity, where identity meets exposure, where the story begins to write itself beyond anyone's control. Evening settled over the Capitol. Windows reflected orange light, but shadows lingered where the sun could not reach. Corridors stretched silently, holding whispers no one dared speak aloud. You've asked this question too. Who truly holds power when the surface seems calm and the currents run invisible beneath? The figure returned to a quiet office. Documents piled high, screens buzzing with updates no one else would notice. Every detail mattered, every omission crucial. And for the first time, the scope of the system became undeniable, a network of influence, carefully calibrated, operating in plain sight. At first glance, it seemed organized, routine, predictable, but as patterns emerged, contradictions became impossible to ignore. Allies acted strangely, enemies anticipated moves before they happened. Even the resignation, the headline everyone focused on, was merely a distraction. You know this feeling, that moment when you realize the rules weren't written for you, that reality is curated. That freedom, in practice, is a negotiated illusion. Reports flickered across the figure's screens. Small details, a phrase, a meeting time, an offhand comment. Alone, each seemed insignificant. Together, they formed a lattice of manipulation. The real story lay not in action, but in the unseen design behind it. Outside, the city continued. Diners hummed. Highways carried commuters. The public debated yesterday's events, unaware that the system had already shifted, preparing for the next domino. And then a paradox revealed itself. The figure, desperate for control, realized they were only one node in a chain. Their decisions mattered, but not in the way they thought. Every move had been anticipated, every reaction measured, every response folded into a larger, invisible logic. You felt this once, haven't you? The chill of recognition that the world is far more complex than headlines suggest, and far less forgiving than anyone admits. A new mini-twist appeared. An unexpected ally, whose loyalty had been assumed, revealed duplicity in subtle ways. A system once thought rigid, proved adaptive, unpredictable, almost sentient. And the figure understood control was never about power, it was about perception. And perception could be bent, fractured, manipulated. Screens flickered again. Footsteps echoed down empty halls. A door clicked. A whisper passed unnoticed. And the emotional weight pressed down. This wasn't about politics. It wasn't about headlines. It was about human nature, fragile, ambitious, flawed, and endlessly entangled in systems too vast to fully see. By midnight, the Capitol was still. The city slept. But the network, invisible, patient, continued to move. And the figure, exhausted, awake, human, felt the first true taste of insight. The storm was not external. The storm was inside. And maybe this is where choices matter most. When the chaos is quiet, but the consequences are loud. When the system watches and the only way to survive is to finally see. Night deepened. The Capitol seemed still. But inside, the hum of machinery, emails, alerts, whispered conversations kept the pulse of the building alive. And those who resonate with it become its unseen center. And maybe this is where everything begins again. Paper rustles with ghostly cadence, doors click shut with deliberate randomness, reflections fracture across walls, columns, and floors. You've seen this before. That moment when calm is only a veneer, and beneath it, everything is moving, faster than anyone realizes. The figure paced their office. Each decision, each conversation carried more weight than they had ever felt. Allies shifted subtly, opponents watched intently. Even neutral observers, aides, clerks, reporters were part of a complex choreography that no one fully controlled. At first, it seemed random, but then a pattern emerged, a chain of cause and effect, linking every resignation, every alliance, every leak. And it was impossible to ignore. The system was both invisible and omnipresent. You know this feeling, the moment you see the threads connecting everything and realize you've been dancing on a stage you didn't know existed. A new mini-twist hit, a whistleblower, previously silent, surfaced. A single detail revealed, seemingly minor, fractured the carefully curated narrative. The resignation, the drama, the headlines, all shadows masking a deeper truth. The figure felt it keenly. Control was an illusion. Power was perception. And perception could be manipulated faster than any law, any policy, any statement. Voices rose elsewhere in the Capitol, arguments, clarifications, denials. The moral pressure was palpable. It was no longer about politics. It was about identity. The figure asked themselves quietly, who am I if my choices are already anticipated? You've felt this once, haven't you? That gnawing recognition that freedom is fragile and influence is rarely transparent. Outside, city lights flickered. Diners closed, highways emptied, and yet the system never slept. Each unseen move, each calculated silence, pulled the story further into complexity. Then came the philosophical sting. The real danger wasn't change. It wasn't the resignation. It wasn't the leaks or the whispers. The real danger was who controlled the definition of normal. Screens blinked with updates. Phones buzzed with unverified reports. And the figure alone, human, awake, realized the truth that would echo long after the night. Chaos is inevitable, but perception can be curated. And survival depends on seeing both. And maybe this was the lesson the system wanted everyone to learn, even if no one admitted it. The Capitol was quiet, too quiet. Footsteps echoed. Whispers carried farther than they should have. And somewhere in a corner office, a figure stared at a wall of screens. You felt this once, haven't you? That tightness in your chest when reality feels thinner than the stories everyone tells. The resignation had been weeks ago, yet its ripples continued to spread. Allies questioned loyalties, opponents sharpened strategies, and the public, blissfully unaware, debated yesterday's headlines. They didn't see the storm behind the scenes. They couldn't. Inside, the figure wrestled with contradictions, ambition versus integrity, legacy versus survival. Every decision now carried personal weight, not the weight of policy, not the weight of optics, the weight of human consequence. You know this feeling, the pressure of knowing a single misstep could undo everything, and that no one would ever fully understand the burden. Then a subtle disruption. A trusted aide delivered a file, not flagged, not urgent, but inside were patterns the figure could not ignore. Allies acting against allies. Secrets previously buried. The resignation, the headlines, the narrative, all fractured, all manipulated. The figure realized the system did not bend to anyone. It absorbed, it anticipated, it adjusted, and humans, no matter how ambitious or brilliant, were caught in its currents. Screens flickered, footsteps echoed. The whisper, slipped through the office. Everything you believe is already part of the story. You felt this once. The sting of understanding that you are simultaneously actor and audience, perceiver and perceived. That identity is fragile. That control is fleeting. Outside, the city moved on. Diners hummed. Highways carried shadows and light. Life continued, indifferent. And inside the Capitol, the figure faced a choice: accept the illusion or confront the chaos. And then the first personal confrontation. An ally, previously unwavering, challenged them directly, words sharp, eyes unflinching. A subtle accusation, loaded with history and intent. The figure's private fears collided with public scrutiny. For a heartbeat, everything froze. You know this feeling. The sudden awareness that no matter how much you plan, someone else is always shaping the outcome. And sometimes, the hardest truths come from those closest to you. By midnight, the emotional stakes had escalated. Not just survival, not just perception, but identity, who they were, who they had become, and whether they could reconcile the two before the system moved again. And maybe this confrontation was only the beginning, a precursor to storms yet unseen, truths yet unrevealed, and decisions that would echo far beyond these walls. The night deepened. Outside, the city slept under a blanket of neon and fog. Inside the Capitol, silence pressed heavily against the walls. Every door, every hallway held secrets. Every shadow suggested movement, and every decision carried unseen consequences. You've seen this before, that shiver when you realize the world isn't as simple as it seems. When rules bend, loyalties shift, and clarity becomes a luxury few can afford. The figure returned to the screens. Patterns emerged, contradictions stacked upon contradictions. Allies who seemed loyal were calculating, opponents who appeared predictable were unpredictable. And the resignation, the event that had captured the headlines, was already part of a much larger system, moving silently, invisibly, inexorably. A paradox revealed itself. Control was an illusion. Freedom was practiced, not given. Power existed only in perception, and perception could be manipulated faster than truth could travel. You know this feeling. The gnawing weight of understanding that no matter how much you act, you are always already inside someone else's design. A mini twist surfaced. A trusted insider had withheld critical information, a detail overlooked by everyone but now revealed. Tiny, almost irrelevant on its own, shattered assumptions. The resignation, the alliances, the whispered deals, all part of a narrative carefully orchestrated to test, measure, and manipulate. And those who resonate with it become its unseen center. And maybe this is where everything begins again. Paper rustles with ghostly cadence, doors click shut with deliberate randomness. Reflections fracture across walls, columns, and floors. The figure felt it in their bones. Every move they had made, every choice they had thought was theirs alone, was entwined with forces beyond comprehension, and yet they could not remain passive. The system demanded engagement. Awareness was survival. Action was inevitable. Footsteps echoed. A phone buzzed. Screens flickered with unverified intelligence. Every sound, every signal demanded attention. The Capitol was no longer a building. It was a network, a living organism of influence and consequence, and the figure had become its node. You felt this once. The prickling awareness that identity, choice, and truth can collide violently under pressure. And sometimes, the hardest decisions arrive without warning. Outside, the world moved obliviously. Diners hummed, highways carried shadows and headlights. Televisions showed the headlines of yesterday, and still the system marched on, quiet, patient, indifferent. The figure understood a critical truth. To survive, to act, to influence, one must see both the threads and the weave. Control exists only for those who understand the pattern. And comprehension, even for a moment, can be more dangerous than ignorance. And maybe the next choice would define everything. Not for the headlines, not for the cameras, but for the mind that finally saw the system for what it truly was. Storm clouds gathered long before anyone noticed. Not outside, but inside the Capitol's invisible machinery. Emails slowed, calls rerouted, routine processes stumbled just enough to feel wrong, not broken, just off. You've seen this before. That subtle malfunction that tells you something larger is happening beneath the surface. The figure felt it instantly. A shift, a tremor, a change in rhythm. Systems that once flowed seamlessly now pulsed with irregularity. Every alert, every message, every unexpected silence felt choreographed, a quiet warning delivered through glitches and shadows. At first, it looked like coincidence, minor, forgettable, but then the pattern emerged. Delays clustered, memos arrived out of order, reports contradicted one another in ways too precise to be accidents. Someone was shaping the flow, not openly, not violently, but with surgical precision. You know this feeling. The chill of realizing the world around you is being rearranged piece by piece while you're still trying to understand the rules. The figure leaned in, zoomed into files, cross-checked timestamps, correlated the inconsistencies, and there, buried deep within the noise, a signal revealed itself. A hidden actor, not officially listed, not publicly recognized, but very real. A shadow network, a group operating inside the system, using the chaos of recent events to test boundaries, shift influence, and bend perception. It wasn't conspiracy, it wasn't espionage, it was something quieter, something more American in its simplicity. A coalition of interests, protecting their definition of stability. You felt this once, haven't you? The moment you realize stability is always engineered, never accidental, the figure confronted a second revelation. The ally who had challenged them the previous night was not acting alone. Their confrontation wasn't personal, it was assigned, encouraged, strategically delivered to push the figure toward a specific decision, a pressure corridor, a narrowing set of choices presented as free will. The emotional weight hit hard. What they believed to be conflict was part of a much larger performance. What they thought was betrayal was actually strategy. Screens flickered again, a sudden blackout of data, then a surge of new information, files unlocked, messages decrypted. For a heartbeat, everything aligned. And the figure saw it, the resignation, the public drama, the quiet power shifts, all converging into a single trajectory. This wasn't about individuals, it wasn't about scandal. It was about influence, control, definition. Who gets to decide what the nation sees and what it never learns? You know, this feeling. The slow, dawning truth that the real conflict is never on the surface, it's always beneath. Hidden, orchestrated, waiting. A final micro-hook landed as midnight approached. A message with no sender, no timestamp, no metadata. 6 words. Cold, precise, impossible to ignore. You're closer than you think. And maybe that was the line the system wanted them to hear, not as a warning, but as an invitation. The capital air felt heavier now, not from panic, not from noise, from awareness. A collective, unspoken understanding that something was shifting beneath the official script. You've seen this before, that moment when everyone pretends life is normal, but every gesture, every glance betrays a quiet dread. The figure replayed the 6-word message in their mind. You're closer than you think. Closer to what? The truth, the target, the danger, the opportunity? The question gnawed at them, pulling threads already frayed by weeks of disruption. A new anomaly surfaced at dawn. Routine security protocols failed twice, not catastrophically, but subtly. Enough to raise eyebrows, enough to signal intent. Enough to tell the figure that the shadow network was testing the perimeter not to break in, but to send a message. You've felt this once, haven't you? When someone pushes your limits, not to hurt you, but to see what you'll do. Inside the Capitol, the flow of information grew erratic. Reports contradicted each other in rhythmic waves, like the system was breathing. Rumors formed faster than facts. Allies whispered more, opponents watched more closely, and the figure, caught in the crossfire, felt a tightening corridor of choices. Then came the first open crack. A senior staffer slipped. Words they weren't supposed to say escaped in a moment of fatigue. Nothing is accidental anymore. Just 6 syllables, but enough to confirm everything. Enough to prove the system wasn't malfunctioning. It was evolving. You know this feeling? The instant something obvious finally becomes undeniable. The figure confronted them quietly, not with anger, not with accusation, just truth. What do you know? A pause, a breath, a shift in their eyes. I know you're not supposed to find the source. The source, a term heavy with implication, a hidden center, a coordinating force behind the anomalies, the pressure, the engineered uncertainty. Every muscle tightened, not from fear, from clarity. The puzzle had edges now, a shape, a direction. A sudden alert pulsed across the office. A data breach, localized, brief, surgical. Someone wanted to see what the figure saw, to trace their steps, measure their progress, evaluate their proximity to the truth. You've seen this before. When someone watches not to stop you, but to understand how fast you're learning. Paper rustles with ghostly cadence, doors click shut with deliberate randomness. Reflections fracture across walls, columns, and floors. Outside, highways filled. Coffee shops warmed with morning chatter. Televisions replayed old headlines, missing the live storm happening behind the scenes. Inside, the emotional stakes tightened. The figure realized with chilling certainty. They weren't uncovering a mystery. They were being guided, steered, tested, observed. Each twist, each anomaly, each whispered hint wasn't designed to confuse them. It was designed to provoke them, to see what they would choose when the system finally revealed itself. And in that moment, with the sun rising through the Capitol's marble windows, the figure understood a truth few ever dared to articulate. The most dangerous secrets aren't the ones people hide. They're the ones people guide you toward. And maybe the next step wasn't about discovery at all. Maybe it was about awakening. Morning light crept through the Capitol windows, thin and cold. It didn't warm the room. It didn't soften the tension. It only revealed how much had changed. You've seen this before, that eerie calm before the first undeniable breach of normal. The figure stood over the terminal, watching the aftermath of the localized data intrusion. Files had been mirrored, not stolen. Activity had been monitored, not corrupted. Every keystroke observed, every query traced, every doubt measured. They weren't under attack. They were under evaluation. A new message appeared on the screen. No sender, no signature. Just 4 words this time, colder than the last. Stop looking for accidents. A breath caught in their throat, not out of fear, out of recognition. Someone knew exactly where their investigation was heading, and they were now responding in real time. You know this feeling, the instant when the invisible becomes aware of you. Across the building, a ripple shifted through routine operations. Conversations grew clipped. Doors that were usually open weren't. Smiles felt intentional. Movements felt rehearsed. The Capitol's entire rhythm changed, like a machine recalibrating itself around a single variable, the figure. And then the first overt confrontation from the shadow network, a call. Encrypted, the kind of call meant for someone far more powerful. The figure hesitated, then answered. A voice, calm, measured, human, spoke 3 lines that froze the room. And you're closer than we expected. You've felt this once, haven't you? The unnerving moment when your instincts are confirmed by someone who is never supposed to notice you. The line went dead. No trace, no recording, no log. But the message lingered. Someone was orchestrating the chaos. Someone had been watching the figure's every move, and they were no longer content with staying hidden. The figure felt the emotional weight shift. This wasn't about scandal. It wasn't about political fallout. It wasn't about a resignation or a public drama. This was about architecture. The architecture of influence, the guardrails of perception, the invisible consensus that held the system together. And now, for reasons still unclear, the system had turned its gaze directly onto them. You know this feeling, the sudden vertigo of being pulled into a game long before you even realized you were playing. The figure moved through the Capitol halls with new alertness. Every conversation felt like misdirection. Every update felt curated. Every ally appeared just a little too rehearsed in their concerns. Until finally, an unexpected visitor stepped into their doorway. A mentor, a voice from their early years, someone they trusted long before politics became a maze. Their expression was soft, their tone gentle, but their words were not a comfort, they were a warning. Step back, not for your safety, for your sanity. A beat, a breath, a truth wrapped in soft edges. You're starting to see the parts you're not meant to name. The figure felt their pulse quicken, not from fear, from clarity. Every warning was confirmation. Every caution was validation. They weren't imagining the pattern. They were stepping into it. And maybe that's what the system feared most. Not exposure, not opposition, but understanding, because once someone understands the pattern, really understands it, the system can't control what they'll do next. The day moved strangely, not fast, not slow, just distorted. As if time itself were watching, waiting to see what the figure would do next. You felt this before, that unsettling awareness that the world isn't reacting to you, it's anticipating you. The mentor's warning replayed in the figure's mind, soft voice, hard truth. You're starting to see the parts you're not meant to name. But instead of fear, something else rose inside them. Focus, a sharp, steady clarity they hadn't felt in years. A clarity that comes only when someone stops being a participant and starts becoming an observer. The figure returned to their office, closed the door, and pulled up the mirrored files the shadow network had accessed. Not to check for damage, not to check for theft, to check for pattern. And there it was, a sequence, a breadcrumb trail, not random, not chaotic, structured, curated, almost educational. Someone wanted them to follow, but only in the right order and only to the point that served a larger intention. You know this feeling, when curiosity stops being innocent and becomes risky. The figure clicked deeper into the sequence. A new file opened, encrypted, locked behind a protocol no one in their position should have access to, but the system let them in anyway. No resistance, no block, no alert, a choice disguised as a coincidence. Inside the file were logs, journal-like entries written by someone inside the shadow network, someone close, someone who understood the architecture better than anyone else. The entries were cold, precise, the kind of writing that doesn't care if it gets found because it assumes it won't. 3 lines stood out. The resignation was a test. The reactions were predictable. Only one variable remains. The figure felt the impact immediately. A breath sharpened. A thought crystallized. They were the variable. Their curiosity, their questions, their refusal to accept the surface narrative, all of it had placed them in a position they never intended to occupy. You've seen this before. That moment when a person realizes they're not outside the story, they're the hinge it turns on. Then, a deeper shock. Another entry. Short. Almost cruel in its simplicity. If they continue, they see the system, not metaphor. Paper rustles with ghostly cadence. Doors click shut with deliberate randomness. Reflections fracture across walls, columns, and floors. Not suggestion. A direct acknowledgement that something real, intentional, and organized pulled the strings behind the Capitol's visible machinery. The figure leaned back, feeling the world narrow into a single point of focus. For weeks, they had felt, watched, measured, guided. Now they understood why. Knowledge wasn't the threat. Awareness was. Because once someone sees the architecture, the flow of influence, the boundaries of narrative, the choreography of perception, they can't unsee it. They can't go back. They can't pretend the system is just coincidence and pressure. Another alert blinked. A new message. This time, not hidden, not cryptic, not subtle. And in that moment, with the sun rising through the Capitol's marble windows, the figure understood a truth few ever dared to articulate. The most dangerous secrets aren't the ones people hide. They're the ones people guide you toward. And maybe the next step wasn't about discovery at all. Maybe it was about awakening. Morning light crept through the Capitol windows, thin and cold. It didn't warm the room. It didn't soften the tension. It only revealed how much had changed. You've seen this before, that eerie calm before the first undeniable breach of normal. The figure stood over the terminal, watching the aftermath of the localized data intrusion. Files had been mirrored, not stolen. And maybe this was the moment the system realized it had underestimated the one variable it couldn't control. The door to the secure basement chamber shut with a hydraulic hiss, sealing out the fluorescent noise of the Capitol hallways. Inside, the temperature felt colder, as if the air conditioning had been set intentionally low to keep people uncomfortable, alert, unable to relax. Only 4 people were allowed in this meeting, and each carried a different version of the truth. McKellen, still pale from the previous night's confrontation, sat stiffly at the table. His hands were clasped so tightly that the knuckles looked bloodless. Across from him sat Eleanor Ridge, the quiet strategist whose influence extended deeper than any title suggested. Beside her was Marcus Hale, the constitutional expert who was technically here as counsel, but in reality, he was the human shield for whatever this meeting might trigger. And finally, Jordan Slate walked in last. He didn't speak at first, didn't sit, didn't blink. He simply placed a thin folder on the table, far thinner than what McKellen expected, and leaned forward like someone presenting a verdict, not evidence. This, Slate said, tapping the folder once, is everything. McKellen swallowed. That's impossible. You said you had a mountain? Slate's voice was calm, unnervingly so. I did. But a mountain is a liability. A mountain can be questioned, scattered, reframed. He slid the folder toward McKellen. A needle won clean, unbreakable needle cannot. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Marcus, who shifted uncomfortably. The tension in the room vibrated like a wire pulled too tight. McKellen opened the folder. Inside, 1 page, 1 paragraph, 1 timeline error. Not a crime, not corruption, not scandal, but something far more dangerous. In Washington, a contradiction that could not coexist with his public oath. His breath caught. This isn't enough to force a resignation. Slate finally sat, folding his hands. No, it's enough to force a choice. Eleanor leaned forward, voice soft but sharp. McKellen, this is leverage, not destruction. Slate isn't trying to end you. He's trying to redirect you. McKellen closed the folder as if it stung. Redirect. The word felt like an insult and salvation at the same time. Slate spoke again, lower now. What you said last night about feeling used, boxed in, surrounded by people who wanted your voice only when it served their script. You were right. McKellen froze. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Jordan. What are you doing? Slate ignored her. He looked at McKellen the way a surgeon looks at a patient before the first incision. You want out, Slate said, but you don't want to run. You want to leave on your terms. Not theirs, not mine, yours. Marcus Hale finally spoke up, his voice shaking just enough to betray nerves. Jordan, if you're proposing what I think, I'm proposing clarity, Slate replied. The room went silent. Slate slid one more item across the table, a draft, not a threat, not a demand, a resignation speech, and not a weak one, not an apology tour, not a political death sentence. It was something else. It was the kind of speech that doesn't end a career, it detonates a new one. McKellen stared at the pages, throat tight. The wording was precise, deliberate, reflective, but edged with a controlled fury, that the public would interpret as truth-telling rather than retreat. It called out the system without naming enemies. It framed his exit as a refusal to be complicit. It positioned him as a man stepping away from power to expose power. He whispered, "You wrote this for me." Slate shook his head. "No, I wrote this for the version of you I saw last night, the one who finally stopped lying to himself." That line hit McKellen harder than anything in the folder. For a moment, no one spoke. The hum of the ventilation system became thunder. Eleanor finally exhaled. "So that's what this is about. You're not threatening him. You're offering him a stage." Slate tilted his head. "Everyone else treats him like a pawn." "I'm treating him like a variable," Marcus whispered. "A variable that could destabilize everything." Slate smiled slowly. "That's the point." McKellen couldn't move, couldn't think. The speech felt radioactive in his hands. Eleanor watched him closely. "This decision will change your life." Slate leaned in. "No, this decision will reveal it." McKellen stood up abruptly, chest scraping the floor. His breath shook as he looked between them 4 people in a room where no one breathed correctly. He held the draft like it was both salvation and execution. "I need time." Slate nodded once. "You've got 48 hours, Eleanor added softly. "Whatever you choose, do it intentionally." McKellen opened the door, stepped into the hallway, and for the first time in his career, he felt the building watching him, not as a leader, but as a man standing at the edge of a cliff, trying to decide whether he was falling or finally learning how to jump. The Capitol at night is not silent. People imagine it as a marble fortress that sleeps, but that's a myth. The building hums after dark. Elevators run without passengers. Security doors lock and unlock on automated cycles. You've seen this before. That moment when a person realizes they're not outside the story, they're the hinge it turns on. Then, a deeper shock. Another entry. Short. Almost cruel in its simplicity. If they continue, they see the system, not metaphor. Paper rustles with ghostly cadence. Doors click shut with deliberate randomness. Reflections fracture across walls, columns, and floors. HVAC vents moan through stone corridors. A century-old structure breathing its own institutional exhaustion. And on this night, as McKellen walked alone toward the East Wing exit, that hum felt alive. As if the building recognized a man carrying a decision that could fracture its equilibrium, he held the draft resignation speech in a slim envelope tucked inside his coat. It felt heavier than legislation, heavier than the oath he'd taken. Every hallway camera he passed felt like an observer waiting to record the moment he broke. When he reached the exit, he paused, hands braced against the cold glass. Outside, Washington glowed with that hazy amber that only appears on nights of political tension. The city seemed to hover between storms. 2 possibilities waited beyond that door, neither guaranteed survival. He stepped into the air. The night smelled like winter and wet stone. A light drizzle cooled the asphalt. Streetlights stretched his shadow across the steps like a warning. A black sedan was already idling at the curb, not his usual car. Something quieter, lower profile. The driver didn't speak as McKellen slid into the back seat. He didn't need to. Everyone who touched the storyline understood the gravity. The car moved. Washington passed in blurred textures, monuments washed pale by rainlight, intersections blinking yellow, empty avenues where the Capitol's pulse slowed just enough to reveal its bones. McKellen pressed his forehead against the window. 48 hours. Slate's clock already ticking. He pulled the envelope out and opened it again, even though he'd already read the speech in the chamber. He whispered the first sentence aloud. "There comes a moment in the arc of public service when silence becomes complicity." He felt that line like a bruise. He closed the envelope. The sedan curved toward the river, toward Georgetown, toward the house where he used to feel like a person before he became a figure. The car stopped. The house lights were off. Only the porch lamp glowed faintly, flickering like it was fighting to stay awake. Inside, the silence hit harder than the night air. His wife was traveling. His kids were grown. No footsteps, no voices, no distractions, just him. And a speech that threatened to rewrite the next decade of his life. He placed the envelope on the dining table, the same table where Years ago, he had once practiced his first debate lines with a youthful confidence that now felt foreign. Back then, he had believed politics was a field for building. Now he knew it was also a field for breaking. He sat down. For a moment, he rested his hands flat on the wood. His pulse thudded like a fist against his ribs. Then he opened his laptop. He didn't search news. He didn't check messages. He simply stared at the blinking cursor in a blank document, a single vertical line that looked exactly like the choice Slate had placed before him. After several minutes, he opened a secure folder, one only he had access to, and pulled up the document he'd been secretly adding to over the past year, a private journal of every moment he'd nearly walked away. Every line he'd never dared to speak aloud. Every fragment of doubt he'd swallowed to appear solid. He scrolled, and then he stopped. One entry, dated 8 months earlier, jumped out like a hand reaching from the screen. I no longer recognize the thing I helped build, and I no longer recognize myself inside it. McKellen leaned back, breath catching. He whispered, so this wasn't sudden. Now he knew the truth. This wasn't Slate's pressure. This wasn't the timeline leak. This wasn't political calculus. The breakdown had begun long before anyone else saw it. The resignation was not an event. It was a confession. He closed the journal abruptly, as if afraid of himself. The house creaked. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. He was alone with a decision that felt less like choosing a path and more like choosing a rebirth. He stood and walked to the window. Across the river, the Capitol dome glowed white against the night sky. It looked distant, regal, untouchable. For years, he'd believed it needed him. Tonight, he wondered whether it ever did. His phone buzzed. A single text, unknown number, one line. You're not the only one deciding tonight. McKellen stiffened. The message wasn't a threat. It wasn't leverage. It was a warning. Somewhere in the city, someone with power, was moving a piece on the same board he was trying to step away from. He typed nothing back. Instead, he stared at the Capitol dome, its reflection shimmering in the river like a fractured mirror. For the first time since the folder slid across the table in that sealed room, he felt something stronger than fear. He felt inevitability, the kind that comes right before the breach. Night fell over Washington like a curtain pulled too quickly, leaving the city in a kind of uneasy dimness. Streetlights flickered on, one by one, as if uncertain whether they wanted to illuminate what came next. Inside the private townhouse on 3rd Street, the one Slate used for meetings too sensitive to happen anywhere else, silence settled deeper than darkness. McKellen stood at the window, staring out over the faint glow of Capitol Hill, that white dome floating in the distance like a reminder, a warning, a witness. The resignation draft sat on the table behind him, unread tonight, read too many times already. He hadn't touched it for hours, but it touched him anyway. Behind him, a door opened softly. Eleanor Ridge entered, calm as always, but something in her expression had shifted. She wasn't here as strategist, advisor, or fixer. Tonight, she was the one person who had no agenda except the truth. She sat without speaking. McKellen kept his eyes on the window. Did Slate send you? No, she said. I came because the city feels like it's holding its breath, and so are you. A small, humorless laugh escaped him. 48 hours. He thinks everything can be decided in 48 hours. No, Eleanor replied softly. He thinks everything should be. McKellen finally turned from the window. His face looked older tonight, not by years, but by truth. You know what terrifies me? He asked. Not resigning, not staying. It's that either choice means I'll finally be honest about who I am. Eleanor folded her hands. Then let's talk about who that is. He exhaled. Long, slow, shaking. For years, he said quietly, I told myself I was fighting for something bigger. This country, the people who believed in me. But somewhere along the way, I started fighting for the version of me I thought they wanted, not the one I actually was. Eleanor didn't interrupt. She knew the power of silence. I listened to the wrong voices, McKellen continued, chased the wrong battles, and now Slate of all people hands me a draft that feels more honest than anything I've said in 5 years. He paused. You know what's worse? His voice cracked. It feels like the first time someone actually saw me. Eleanor's eyes softened. Jordan didn't offer you a speech, McKellen. He offered you a mirror. He sank into the chair across from her, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. There's something else, he whispered. Something he had told no one. 3 months ago, before everything escalated, I drafted my own resignation. He swallowed. I never finished it, but I started. Eleanor blinked, caught off guard for the first time that night. You? Why didn't you tell anyone? Because admitting I wanted out felt like failure. His throat tightened, and I've spent my entire career pretending I never fail. Eleanor leaned closer. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. McKellen, leaving isn't failure. Staying for the wrong reasons is. He looked up, eyes raw, exhausted, human. Slate wants me to detonate something. The party wants me to stay silent. The media wants a story. The system wants obedience. He shook his head. But what do I want? Eleanor answered gently. That's the one question no one can manipulate. He sat back, breathing hard. The weight in the room shifted, as if some invisible force loosened its grip. For the first time in days, McKellen didn't look hunted. He looked awake. I need to speak to Slate, he said. Eleanor nodded. He's downstairs. McKellen stood, walked toward the hallway, and placed his hand on the stair railing, but paused. What if I'm making a mistake? Eleanor's voice was calm, steady, grounding. Then make a mistake you can live with, not one someone else writes for you. He closed his eyes, and something inside him, something quiet and tired, but undeniably alive, finally answered. He descended the stairs. At the bottom, Jordan Slate was waiting, not smiling, not pushing, just watching him with the stillness of a man who knew this moment was bigger than politics, bigger than leverage, bigger than strategy. McKellen stepped onto the last stair. I've made my decision, he said. Slate raised an eyebrow. And? McKellen inhaled. The answer, whichever one it was, felt like the beginning of the rest of his life. The first warning wasn't loud. It was subtle, almost polite. A late-night memo, a missing signature, a door left cracked open in a hallway that was always locked. Small things, forgettable things, unless you were looking, and someone was. A junior analyst, quiet, pale, barely noticed, had stumbled across a pattern hidden in the noise. He didn't understand it, but he felt it. The way you feel a storm before the first thunder. You know this feeling when something simple suddenly isn't. The analyst tried to report it. 3 emails, 2 calls, 1 attempt to knock on an office door, all ignored. Not because people were careless, but because they were too busy surviving the chaos Greene's resignation had ignited. Too busy untangling the RFK Jr. scandal that refused to die. Too busy trying to keep the Capitol breathing. By then, the political oxygen was thin. Screens flashed headlines. Rumors spread faster than facts. Every hallway felt overheated. And yet, behind it all, that pattern kept growing. A sudden reshuffling of committee assignments, a classified briefing moved without explanation, staffers whispering about a second shockwave. But here's the part almost no one saw. None of it came from the usual sources, not from the loud ones, not from the opportunists, not from the predictable political climbers. This time, the pressure came from outside the frame. A coalition no one had named, a motive no one had guessed, a narrative no one had written yet, and the analyst, still invisible, still unnoticed, still staring at data no one believed, was the first to realize the truth. The resignation wasn't the ending. It was the opening move. He didn't know what was coming next. But he knew this. The real storm hasn't touched the Capitol yet, and the cracks were spreading quietly. It happened fast, then slow, then all at once. A morning like any other, coffee carts steaming, staffers rushing, tour groups gathering under the rotunda's echoing dome. Business as usual, until the alarms chimed, not blared, chimed, a soft, unsettling tone that didn't belong in a place built on ceremony and marble. People froze. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. A door slammed. Someone shouted. A cluster of aides sprinted across a balcony like their careers or their lives depended on it. And in that single moment, the Capitol shifted. Not physically, psychologically, emotionally. You've seen this before. When a room senses bad news, before anyone speaks it, pressure tightened. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the air felt unnatural. Then the announcement hit. A second resignation. Unexpected, unconnected, impossible to ignore. The RFK Jr. communications scandal, something everyone believed they understood, had quietly metastasized into something stranger, something deeper. And this time, it wasn't a firebrand member stepping down. It was someone known for discipline, caution, and order, a stabilizer, a grown-up in the room, the kind of person who normally waits out storms, not walks into them. But the shock wasn't the resignation itself, it was the letter, just 3 sentences. No accusations, no explanations, no drama. Just, I cannot abide the conditions emerging behind the scenes. Decisions are being made without the consent of those meant to make them. This building deserves honesty, 26 words, and they detonated. Newsrooms scrambled, phones exploded. The Capitol swallowed a breath it didn't release. People said phrases like, "This can't be real, this is coordinated, no one leaves without a push," but one line repeated more than the others. What exactly is happening behind those doors? Because if 2 resignations were visible, how many were invisible? And then nothing made sense, which is exactly how the architects of chaos wanted it. The doors were heavy, thick, soundproof, not metaphorically, literally. A restricted conference room on the Capitol's 4th floor, used only for matters whose consequences could not tolerate daylight. Some called it the vault, some called it the echo chamber. Most pretended it didn't exist. But on this night, it was full. 12 people, not elected officials, not public faces, the real operators, strategists, legal architects, technical minds with clearance levels that didn't show up on maps or paperwork. They weren't panicked, they weren't loud, they weren't emotional, they were calculating, and that alone was terrifying. Screens glowed, symbols flickered, a timeline stretched across the wall like a surgical diagram. At the center of the table sat a single folder, thin, unmarked, terrifying in its simplicity. Inside it, one fact. The RFK Jr. media scandal was never just a scandal. It was a lever designed to trigger movement elsewhere, to push certain officials into corners, to test who would stay loyal, to expose who might fracture under pressure. A stress test, a psychological audit, a political MRI of the entire Capitol. And it worked. Too well. Because Greene's resignation wasn't the intended first domino. It was an outlier. A piece that moved before the players were ready. And the second resignation, that one wasn't part of the plan either. Someone somewhere had accelerated the timeline. A force outside the 12 people in that room. A force that wasn't supposed to be part of the game. You felt this once, haven't you? When a plan you thought you controlled suddenly isn't yours anymore. The vault went silent. Then the lead strategist whispered, "We're no longer managing the narrative. We're reacting to it." And that sentence, calm, quiet, devastating, confirmed the fear rippling through the Capitol. Whatever was unfolding was bigger than a scandal, bigger than a resignation, bigger than any power structure inside those walls. Something unseen had entered the arena, and now every move mattered, every lie, every truth, every silence. "The storm isn't coming," the strategist added. "It's already here." The room felt colder than it should have been, not because of the air, but because of the tension that had settled inside it, layer by layer, like frost creeping over glass. Someone shut the door quietly behind them. A soft click, barely audible. But every head turned anyway. And for a moment, no one spoke. You know this feeling, when the truth is too close to name and too dangerous to ignore. Marjorie Greene stood near the long oak table, shoulders tight, breath thin, eyes locked on the folder she still hadn't opened. It hadn't left her hand since the meeting began. She held it like a lifeline or a confession. A screen flickered at the end of the room. A map appeared, red dots scattered across the country, dozens of them, each pulsing, dim, fading, returning almost like they were breathing. These locations, Rowan said, voice steady but worn, represent every communication node involved in the broadcast anomaly. This country, the people who believed in me. But somewhere along the way, I started fighting for the version of me I thought they wanted, not the one I actually was. Eleanor didn't interrupt. She knew the power of silence. I listened to the wrong voices, McKellen continued, chased the wrong battles, and now Slate of all people hands me a draft that feels more honest than anything I've said in 5 years. He paused. You know what's worse? His voice cracked. It feels like the first time someone actually saw me. Eleanor's eyes softened. Jordan didn't offer you a speech, McKellen. He offered you a mirror. He sank into the chair across from her, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. There's something else, he whispered. Something he had told no one. 3 months ago, before everything escalated, I drafted my own resignation. He swallowed. I never finished it, but I started. Eleanor blinked, caught off guard for the first time that night. You? Why didn't you tell anyone? Because admitting I wanted out felt like failure. His throat tightened, and I've spent my entire career pretending I never fail. Eleanor leaned closer. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. McKellen, leaving isn't failure. Staying for the wrong reasons is. He looked up, eyes raw, exhausted, human. Slate wants me to detonate something. The party wants me to stay silent. The media wants a story. The system wants obedience. He shook his head. But what do I want? Eleanor answered gently. That's the one question no one can manipulate. He sat back, breathing hard. The weight in the room shifted, as if some invisible force loosened its grip. For the first time in days, McKellen didn't look hunted. He looked awake. I need to speak to Slate, he said. Eleanor nodded. He's downstairs. McKellen stood, walked toward the hallway, and placed his hand on the stair railing, but paused. What if I'm making a mistake? Eleanor's voice was calm, steady, grounding. Then make a mistake you can live with, not one someone else writes for you. He closed his eyes, and something inside him, something quiet and tired, but undeniably alive, finally answered. He descended the stairs. At the bottom, Jordan Slate was waiting, not smiling, not pushing, just watching him with the stillness of a man who knew this moment was bigger than politics, bigger than leverage, bigger than strategy. McKellen stepped onto the last stair. I've made my decision, he said. Slate raised an eyebrow. And? McKellen inhaled. The answer, whichever one it was, felt like the beginning of the rest of his life. The first warning wasn't loud. It was subtle, almost polite. A late-night memo, a missing signature, a door left cracked open in a hallway that was always locked. Small things, forgettable things, unless you were looking, and someone was. A junior analyst, quiet, pale, barely noticed, had stumbled across a pattern hidden in the noise. He didn't understand it, but he felt it. The way you feel a storm before the first thunder. You know this feeling when something simple suddenly isn't. The analyst tried to report it. 3 emails, 2 calls, 1 attempt to knock on an office door. Broadcast anomaly, that was the official term. A sanitized phrase for something no one fully understood. The truth? The nation had heard something it wasn't meant to hear. A message wrapped in static. A voice no one could clearly identify. A warning disguised as interference. And Mara was at the center of the fallout. But this, Rowan pointed to a cluster of dots blinking rapidly near the eastern seaboard. This is what doesn't make sense. He zoomed in. The cluster wasn't random. It formed a pattern, a curve, a line, a shape, a symbol. A symbol everyone in that room recognized, even if no one dared to say it out loud. You've seen this before. The narrator inside your mind whispers. And you have, because symbols have power. especially the ones not meant to be rediscovered. Mara finally spoke. It wasn't supposed to spread. Her voice cracked, not from weakness, but from weight, a truth too heavy to hold silently. "What do you mean?" Rowan asked. She swallowed hard, pressed the folder to her chest. "You're telling us," he continued, "that this wasn't an accident?" Her eyes flicked toward the door, toward the hallway, toward whoever might be listening. Then she exhaled. "There's a group," she began softly. "Not official, not documented, not acknowledged." You felt the room shift, like the floor itself leaned in. "They call themselves the Quiet Circle." A ripple passed through the room, small but sharp. You felt it too. Because every American knows one thing. When something has no name, that's when you should be afraid. They operate beneath the committees, beneath the oversight channels, beneath everything. She paused. They believe information shouldn't be free. It should be curated. The word stung, because it sounded innocent on the surface and sinister underneath. Rowan leaned forward. "Mara, what does this have to do with the broadcast?" Her grip tightened around the folder. You could almost hear the cardboard strain. "The message wasn't meant for the public," she said. "It was meant for the circle." A silence heavier than the room settled. She opened the folder. Inside were documents stamped with 3 letters. Large, black, unmistakable. SCS, Selective Communication System. But that wasn't the part that froze everyone. Under the documents was a photograph. A single device, metal, sleek, unmarked, attached to a broadcast relay tower, and behind it, a shadowed figure placing it by hand. Rowan's voice dropped. "Who installed this?" Mara lifted her eyes. "That's why I resigned," she said. "Because when I asked that question, everything changed. You felt that, the tremor, the fracture, the beginning of a storm." She continued. "People stopped looking me in the eye. Files disappeared. Meetings moved without notice. Security protocols were rewritten overnight, without signatures." Her voice trembled. "And then, the messages started." "What messages?" Rowan asked. She slid a single slip of paper across the table, a note, handwritten, 8 words. "Stop digging, or we'll bury the answers." No signature, no date, just menace. Rowan read it twice, then a third time. "You've felt this too, that moment when someone finally admits the thing you suspected but hoped wasn't true." Mara set the folder down. "The circle wants a narrative they can control. The broadcast wasn't rogue. It was a test." "A test of what?" he asked. Her answer was almost a whisper. "Obedience." The dots on the screen pulsed again, red lights blinking like warnings. Outside, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Closer, heavier, measured. Everyone turned toward the door. The handle moved, just lightly. A breath caught in the room. Then, silence. Too much silence. Mara looked back at Rowan. "There's one more thing," she said. "The part no one was supposed to know. A beat, a breath, a tremor. The circle isn't watching the country." She pointed toward the blinking map. "They're watching the people who try to fix it." Your pulse tightened. Because this wasn't about politics. It wasn't about parties. It was about power that fears the truth more than enemies. Rowan closed the folder slowly. "We're not done," he said. Mara nodded. "No," she whispered. "We're nowhere near done." The lights flickered. A shadow crossed the glass window of the room. But the cracks were spreading, quietly, relentlessly, like a truth that refused to stay buried. And the real story, the one no one had dared to speak aloud, was finally crawling into the open. But what they found next would change everything. The hallway didn't have clocks, no windows, no markers of time, only the hum, a low, electric hum that made the air feel heavier, as if the building itself were holding its breath. And this was where the real conversations happened. Not on the floor, not in the press rooms, here, in the corridor beneath the Capitol, where footsteps echoed like decisions waiting to be made. Tonight, those footsteps belonged to two people who should never have crossed paths. But they had, and nothing was going back to normal. You know this feeling. When the wrong two people meet at exactly the wrong time, and suddenly everything accelerates. Clara Hale walked with her shoulders locked tight, a folder pressed against her chest like a lifeline. She'd been many things these past few days: whistleblower, traitor, truth-teller, runaway. But now she was something else, a courier of consequences. Ahead of her, Director Mason remained silent. His stride was slow, almost methodical, not nervous, not rushed, just aware. Aware of the weight Clara carried, aware of the echoes behind them, aware of the doors that had quietly closed once she stepped inside this place. And you're certain? He finally asked. Clara nodded. Not with confidence she didn't have any left, but with resignation. There's more, she whispered. A lot more. Of course there was. There always is. The part almost no one sees. Mason exhaled through his nose, a long, controlled breath that suggested he'd been expecting this moment, just not so soon. They're not going to like this upstairs, he said. Clara laughed under her breath. Not out of humor, out of disbelief. Do they ever? They reached a door at the end of the corridor, unmarked, gray, forgettable. Mason pressed his badge to the reader. Green light, heavy click. The door opened. Clara hesitated. This country, the people who believed in me. But somewhere along the way, I started fighting for the version of me I thought they wanted, not the one I actually was. Eleanor didn't interrupt. She knew the power of silence. I listened to the wrong voices, McKellen continued, chased the wrong battles, and now Slate of all people hands me a draft that feels more honest than anything I've said in 5 years. He paused. You know what's worse? His voice cracked. It feels like the first time someone actually saw me. Eleanor's eyes softened. Jordan didn't offer you a speech, McKellen. He offered you a mirror. He sank into the chair across from her, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. There's something else, he whispered, something he had told no one. 3 months ago, before everything escalated, I drafted my own resignation. He swallowed. I never finished it, but I started. Eleanor blinked, caught off guard for the first time that night. You? Why didn't you tell anyone? Because admitting I wanted out felt like failure. His throat tightened, and I've spent my entire career pretending I never fail. Eleanor leaned closer. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. McKellen, leaving isn't failure. Staying for the wrong reasons is. He looked up, eyes raw, exhausted, human. Slate wants me to detonate something. The party wants me to stay silent. The media wants a story. The system wants obedience. He shook his head. But what do I want? Eleanor answered gently. That's the one question no one can manipulate. He sat back, breathing hard. The weight in the room shifted, as if some invisible force loosened its grip. For the first time in days, McKellen didn't look hunted. He looked awake. I need to speak to Slate, he said. Eleanor nodded. He's downstairs. McKellen stood, walked toward the hallway, and placed his hand on the stair railing, but paused. What if I'm making a mistake? Eleanor's voice was calm, steady, grounding. Then make a mistake you can live with, not one someone else writes for you. He closed his eyes, and something inside him, something quiet and tired, but undeniably alive, finally answered. He descended the stairs. At the bottom, Jordan Slate was waiting, not smiling, not pushing, just watching him with the stillness of a man who knew this moment was bigger than politics, bigger than leverage, bigger than strategy. McKellen stepped onto the last stair. I've made my decision, he said. Slate raised an eyebrow. And? McKellen inhaled. The answer, whichever one it was, felt like the beginning of the rest of his life. The first warning wasn't loud. It was subtle, almost polite. A late-night memo, a missing signature, a door left cracked open in a hallway that was always locked. Small things, forgettable things, unless you were looking, and someone was. A junior analyst, quiet, pale, barely noticed, had stumbled across a pattern hidden in the noise. He didn't understand it, but he felt it. The way you feel a storm before the first thunder. You know this feeling when something simple suddenly isn't. The analyst tried to report it. 3 emails, 2 calls, 1 attempt to knock on an office door. Because the last time she stepped into a room like this, something in her life split. Quietly, permanently. You felt that too. The threshold moment, when you know the next step changes everything after it. She stepped in. Inside, the room was shockingly small. Just a circular table, dim lighting, and a single binder placed in the center like a dare. Not anyone Clara recognized. This alone was terrifying. Mason gestured for her to sit. Miss Hale will brief you on the inconsistencies. All of them. The woman in the gray suit leaned forward. Inconsistencies or deceptions? Clara swallowed. Her throat felt like it had closed. Both. Silence fell, heavy, expectant, and then Clara opened the folder. Photos, dates, cross-referenced communication logs, flight manifests, funding allocations that didn't match their public labels, a paper trail that began years before the scandal hit sunlight. At first, the 3 officials studied the documents like analysts. Then something shifted. The man with the silver-rimmed glasses stiffened. The woman in gray exhaled sharply. The younger man at the far end whispered, almost involuntarily, "Someone buried this." Clara nodded. And they buried it deep. Mason didn't move. He didn't react. He just watched. Because he already knew the truth that was coming next. "But why bring it to us?" the woman in gray asked, voice thin. "Why now? Why here?" Clara steadied her breathing. "Because the person who told me to hide this resigned today." And the moment she stepped down, everything changed. The table went silent again. 1 sentence. That's all it took. A resignation, unexpected, loud, messy, wasn't an ending. It was the signal flare, a sign that someone behind the scenes had reached the moment of no return. "But that's not the part you should be worried about," Clara added. She turned another page, and there it was. The connection no one wanted to believe. The overlap between financial influence and narrative manipulation. The triangulation of pressure that reached higher than any public drama could explain. The real story wasn't her resignation, Clara said. She tapped the page. It was who asked her to do it. The younger man flinched as realization spread across his face. And then, right then, the lights flickered. Just once. But enough. Enough to freeze the room. Enough to pull every head upward. Enough to remind them all where they were and what they were dealing with. "A system reacts when it feels threatened," Mason murmured. Clara closed the folder, suddenly aware of the cold sweat on her palms. "So what happens now?" she asked. The woman in gray answered first. "Now we verify," the man with the glasses added. "Then we protect you." But it was the younger man who said the part no one else wanted to. And after that, we find out who's been writing the script behind all of this. But the meeting wasn't over, not even close, because Clara reached into her coat pocket and placed a second item on the table, a small black drive, unmarked, silent, terrifying. Mason's eyes widened, just slightly. "You said you had a folder," he whispered. "You didn't mention a drive." Clara looked straight ahead. "I found it the night before she resigned," she said. "Hidden in the back of her desk drawer, wrapped in tape. No labels, no instructions. The room changed. You could feel it. The air grew dense. The silence became sharper. The kind of tension that doesn't ask questions, it demands answers." The woman in gray leaned in, voice suddenly softer. "And what's on it?" Clara's reply came out like a confession. "I don't know. But whatever it is, she was terrified someone would find it. There are moments rare, quiet, decisive, when a story turns on a single unknown. This was that moment." Mason extended his hand. "Give it to me." Clara hesitated. Not because she didn't trust him, but because she did. And trust was dangerous now. Still, she placed the drive in his palm. He slid it into a small, static-proof pouch, sealed it, and stood. This goes to the subcommittee. Immediately, the man with the glasses objected. It hasn't been authenticated. We'll authenticate it on arrival. That breaks protocol. Mason paused at the door. So does everything happening tonight? Clara stayed behind. As Mason left, her legs trembled beneath the table, not from fear, from the realization that she had just handed over something that could shift the ground beneath the entire narrative. The woman in gray spoke gently, almost human now. Miss Hale, do you understand the magnitude of what you just set in motion? Clara stared at her hands. Yes, she whispered. But inside, she wasn't sure. Not anymore. Because the truth didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a fuse. And someone somewhere had just struck a match. When Clara finally left the room, the corridor was even quieter than before. That electric hum felt louder, closer. She walked slowly. And with each step, she sensed it, but now she was something else. A courier of consequences. Ahead of her, Director Mason remained silent. His stride was slow, almost methodical. Not nervous, not rushed, just aware. Aware of the weight Clara carried. Aware of the echoes behind them. Aware of the doors that had quietly closed once she stepped inside this place. And you're certain? He finally asked. Clara nodded. Not with confidence she didn't have any left, but with resignation. There's more, she whispered. A lot more. Of course there was. There always is. The part almost no one sees. Mason exhaled through his nose, a long, controlled breath that suggested he'd been expecting this moment, just not so soon. They're not going to like this upstairs, he said. Clara laughed under her breath. Not out of humor, out of disbelief. Do they ever? They reached a door at the end of the corridor, unmarked, gray, forgettable. Mason pressed his badge to the reader. Green light, heavy click. The door opened. Clara hesitated. This country, the people who believed in me. But somewhere along the way, I started fighting for the version of me I thought they wanted, not the one I actually was. Eleanor didn't interrupt. She knew the power of silence. I listened to the wrong voices, McKellen continued, chased the wrong battles, and now Slate of all people hands me a draft that feels more honest than anything I've said in 5 years. He paused. You know what's worse? His voice cracked. It feels like the first time someone actually saw me. Eleanor's eyes softened. Jordan didn't offer you a speech, McKellen. He offered you a mirror. He sank into the chair across from her, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. There's something else, he whispered. Something he had told no one. 3 months ago, before everything escalated, I drafted my own resignation. He swallowed. I never finished it, but I started. Eleanor blinked, caught off guard for the first time that night. You? Why didn't you tell anyone? Because admitting I wanted out felt like failure. His throat tightened, and I've spent my entire career pretending I never fail. Eleanor leaned closer. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. McKellen, leaving isn't failure. Staying for the wrong reasons is. He looked up, eyes raw, exhausted, human. Slate wants me to detonate something. The party wants me to stay silent. The media wants a story. The system wants obedience. He shook his head. But what do I want? Eleanor answered gently. That's the one question no one can manipulate. He sat back, breathing hard. The weight in the room shifted, as if some invisible force loosened its grip. For the first time in days, McKellen didn't look hunted. He looked awake. I need to speak to Slate, he said. Eleanor nodded. He's downstairs. McKellen stood, walked toward the hallway, and placed his hand on the stair railing, but paused. What if I'm making a mistake? Eleanor's voice was calm, steady, grounding. Then make a mistake you can live with, not one someone else writes for you. He closed his eyes, and something inside him, something quiet and tired, but undeniably alive, finally answered. He descended the stairs. At the bottom, Jordan Slate was waiting, not smiling, not pushing, Just watching him with the stillness of a man who knew this moment was bigger than politics, bigger than leverage, bigger than strategy, McKellen stepped onto the last stair. "I've made my decision," he said. Slate raised an eyebrow. "And?" McKellen inhaled. The answer, whichever one it was, felt like the beginning of the rest of his life. The first warning wasn't loud. It was subtle, almost polite. A late-night memo, a missing signature, a door left cracked open in a hallway that was always locked. Small things, forgettable things, unless you were looking, and someone was. A junior analyst, quiet, pale, barely noticed, had stumbled across a pattern hidden in the noise. He didn't understand it, but he felt it. The way you feel a storm before the first thunder. You know this feeling, when something simple suddenly isn't. The analyst tried to report it. 3 emails, 2 calls, 1 attempt to knock on an office door. She wasn't the only one awake in this building tonight. Someone else was watching. Someone else knew about the folder, the drive, the meeting, everything. Someone unseen, unnamed, unaffected by the rules everyone else followed. The tension didn't come from what Clara had revealed, but from the unanswered question her evidence created. Who had orchestrated the resignation? Who had buried the connections? Who had been pulling strings before anyone realized there were strings at all? And here was the part almost no one saw. The story wasn't winding down. It was widening, deepening, accelerating. Because tonight wasn't the fallout. Tonight was the ignition, the spark, the moment when the people behind the curtain felt the first ripple of disruption, and somewhere in an office far from the corridors, a phone buzzed, a message lit up the screen. Just 3 words. She opened it. Night had fallen over the city, but inside the Capitol, the lights remained harsh and artificial. Every corner seemed sharper, every hallway longer, every whisper louder than it should have been. You felt this before. That sudden awareness that the world you thought you knew has rules you've never seen and a script you weren't meant to read. McKellen sat alone in the private conference room. The draft resignation speech lay in front of him, not as paper, not as ink, but as a mirror, a reflection of the choices he had refused to see before. Screens flickered around him, messages pinged, indicators lit, and through the noise came clarity, harsh, unyielding, undeniable. You know this feeling. The chill when realization cuts deeper than fear. The shadow network had shifted from observation to orchestration. Every anomaly, every misstep, every testing of boundaries had been calibrated to guide him here, to this crossroads, to this choice. A single question had been planted weeks ago. Small, subtle, almost invisible. And now it returned. What will you do when the system shows you everything? McKellen leaned back, eyes tracing the lines of the speech, the invisible threads weaving history and consequence together. Freedom, influence, legacy, perception, all staring back at him like specters. A knock at the door. Eleanor entered, calm but piercing. "You're not alone," she said softly, "but you're also not free from what comes next." He looked up. "I feel like I'm seeing the gears for the first time, and it terrifies me." "You're supposed to be terrified," she replied. "The system doesn't break for comfort, it bends for comprehension, and it only allows a few to walk away intact." A voice crackled from the intercom slate. 2 hours remain. After that, decisions crystallize. The world will notice, or it won't, but the system always will. McKellen exhaled slowly. This wasn't about resignation anymore. It wasn't about perception. It was about identity, about how far he would go to step out of a system designed to bend people into predictability. He stood, walked to the window. The city below sprawled in yellow and white lights. Each car, each diner, each shadow, a reminder that life went on, indifferent to the secrets now pressing on him. And then a subtle truth hit. The system wasn't his enemy. It never had been. It was a mirror. It reflected not power, but choice. And those who learned its rhythms could either bow or dance. He returned to the folder. The speech, the choices, the consequences, all converged in one singular moment. And for the first time, he felt clarity. You felt this once. The moment when the storm isn't outside you, the storm is inside you. And the only way forward is to step into it. McKellen picked up the pen, and maybe this was the first act of true freedom. The Capitol's halls felt empty, but emptiness is deceptive. Every wall held whispers. Every shadow carried observation. Every step echoed against unseen eyes. You felt this before, the oppressive quiet that precedes a storm. Not the storm outside, but the storm inside. McKellen sat at the desk. The resignation speech lay open. The ink felt heavier than paper. Every word carried consequence. Every pause measured against public perception, private integrity, and the unknown judgment of the system itself. Screens flickered, messages arrived, vanished. Alerts pulsed and faded. Each heartbeat of the network synchronized with his own. Then the intercom buzzed. Slate's voice. Time is almost up. The system is watching. And you are no longer a variable. You are a signal. Eleanor appeared in the doorway. Her eyes, calm but unwavering, met his. You've seen the architecture. You've felt its pressure. And now you have to move through it, not around it. You know this feeling, when every choice feels enormous and every hesitation is measured against consequences you can't yet predict. McKellen took a deep breath. He imagined the headlines, the public debate, the whispers, the system's patient gaze. And then he imagined something else, truth, not simple, not safe, but uncompromising. He dipped the pen and began to write, every word deliberate, every sentence a bridge between integrity and strategy. The resignation was no longer an escape. It was an act of revelation. Outside, city lights flickered, a diner door swung shut. Highways carried vehicles, unaware of the seismic shift underway in these halls. Yet the storm had already begun. Not in chaos, not in noise. They're not going to like this upstairs, he said. Clara laughed under her breath. Not out of humor, out of disbelief. Do they ever? They reached a door at the end of the corridor, unmarked, gray, forgettable. Mason pressed his badge to the reader. Green light, heavy click. The door opened. Clara hesitated. This country, the people who believed in me. But somewhere along the way, I started fighting for the version of me I thought they wanted, not the one I actually was. Eleanor didn't interrupt. She knew the power of silence. I listened to the wrong voices, McKellen continued, chased the wrong battles, and now Slate of all people hands me a draft that feels more honest than anything I've said in 5 years. He paused. You know what's worse? His voice cracked. It feels like the first time someone actually saw me. Eleanor's eyes softened. Jordan didn't offer you a speech, McKellen. He offered you a mirror. He sank into the chair across from her, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. There's something else, he whispered, something he had told no one. 3 months ago, before everything escalated, I drafted my own resignation. He swallowed. I never finished it, but I started. Eleanor blinked, caught off guard for the first time that night. You? Why didn't you tell anyone? Because admitting I wanted out felt like failure. His throat tightened, and I've spent my entire career pretending I never fail. Eleanor leaned closer. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. McKellen, leaving isn't failure. Staying for the wrong reasons is. He looked up, eyes, raw, exhausted, human. Slate wants me to detonate something. The party wants me to stay silent. The media wants a story. The system wants obedience. He shook his head. But what do I want? Eleanor answered gently. That's the one question no one can manipulate. He sat back, breathing hard. The weight in the room shifted, as if some invisible force loosened its grip. For the first time in days, McKellen didn't look hunted. He looked awake. I need to speak to Slate, he said. Eleanor nodded. He's downstairs. McKellen stood, walked toward the hallway, and placed his hand on the stair railing, but paused. What if I'm making a mistake? Eleanor's voice was calm, steady, grounding. Then make a mistake you can live with, not one someone else writes for you. He closed his eyes, and something inside him, something quiet and tired, but undeniably alive, finally answered. He descended the stairs. At the bottom, Jordan Slate was waiting, not smiling, not pushing, just watching him with the stillness of a man who knew this moment was bigger than politics, bigger than leverage, bigger than strategy. McKellen stepped onto the last stair. I've made my decision, he said. Slate raised an eyebrow. And? McKellen inhaled. The answer, whichever one it was, felt like the beginning of the rest of his life. The first warning wasn't loud. It was subtle, almost polite. A late-night memo, a missing signature, a door left cracked open in a hallway that was always locked. Small things, forgettable things, unless you were looking, and someone was. A junior analyst, quiet, pale, barely noticed, had stumbled across a pattern hidden in the noise. He didn't understand it, but he felt it. The way you feel a storm before the first thunder. You know this feeling when something simple suddenly isn't. The analyst tried to report it. 3 emails, 2 calls, 1 attempt to knock on an office door, but with the understanding that the storm leaves its mark on those who choose to face it, and the system, finally, can never unsee the one variable that learned to see. The wind lifted. The lights of the city blinked. A new day had begun. And the quiet truth lingered. Freedom is not inherited. It is practiced. It is earned. It is chosen. And whispered, not for the world, but for himself, this isn't the end. It's the beginning. And maybe this is when the system finally realized that the most dangerous variable was not rebellion, not defiance, but understanding. The capital remained still. The city slept. But a new current pulsed beneath it all, quiet, persistent, unseen by most, impossible to ignore for those who had chosen to see. The dawn was fragile. Pink and gold streaked the sky over Washington, washing the capital in light that felt almost unreal. You've seen this before. That moment when the night's chaos is over, but its weight remains. When the world continues, indifferent to everything that changed in the shadows, McKellen stepped out of the building. The folder with the resignation speech was gone. The decision had been made, not for fame, not for vengeance, not for power, for clarity, for integrity, for truth. The city moved around him. Diners opened, highways filled with cars. Televisions replayed yesterday's headlines. And yet, he knew the real story was invisible to most. You've felt this once, haven't you? The quiet after a storm, when everything looks the same, but nothing is. Inside the system, the currents continued. The shadow network adjusted. The gears of influence turned. But one variable had shifted. The variable no one could control had chosen understanding over obedience. A soft echo of Eleanor's voice lingered. You've seen the system, and now it has seen you. McKellen allowed himself a small, ironic smile. He had been the actor. He had been the audience. He had been the variable. And now, for the first time, he felt the space between observation and action. The streets beyond shimmered in morning light. Each passing car, each unnoticed pedestrian, carried on a life oblivious to the storm that had raged just steps away. But McKellen carried it with him, not as a burden, not as fear, but as knowledge. As freedom practiced, not inherited. He paused on a bridge, overlooking the reflecting pool. The water mirrored the sky. The city reflected in quiet symmetry. And he realized the truth. The world does not wait. It never stops. And those who act with understanding shape it quietly, irreversibly. You know this feeling, the hush after upheaval, the calm inside the eye of chaos, the recognition that choice is not safety, but responsibility. McKellen turned away from the water, walked back into the streets, back into the city that carried on as if nothing had happened. But he knew it had. It had changed. And in some invisible ways, so had he. And maybe this is where everything begins again. Not with headlines, not with applause, but with the understanding that the storm leaves its mark on those who choose to face it, and the system finally can never unsee the one variable that learned to see. The wind lifted, the lights of the city blinked. A new day had begun, and the quiet truth lingered. Freedom is not inherited. It is practiced, it is earned, it is chosen. Not the storm outside, but the storm inside. McKellen sat at the desk. The resignation speech lay open. The ink felt heavier than paper. Every word carried consequence. Every pause measured against public perception, private integrity, and the unknown judgment of the system itself. Screens flickered. Messages arrived, vanished. Alerts pulsed and faded. Each heartbeat of the network synchronized with his own. Then the intercom buzzed. Slate's voice. Time is almost up. The system is watching. And you are no longer a variable. You are a signal. Eleanor appeared in the doorway. Her eyes, calm but unwavering, met his. You've seen the architecture. You've felt its pressure. And now you have to move through it, not around it. You know this feeling, when every choice feels enormous and every hesitation is measured against consequences you can't yet predict. McKellen took a deep breath. He imagined the headlines, the public debate, the whispers, the system's patient gaze. And then he imagined something else. Truth. Not simple, not safe, but uncompromising. He dipped the pen and began to write. Every word deliberate. Every sentence a bridge between integrity and strategy. The resignation was no longer an escape. It was an act of revelation. Outside, city lights flickered. A diner door swung shut. Highways carried vehicles, unaware of the seismic shift underway in these halls. Yet the storm had already begun. Not in chaos, not in noise. They're not going to like this upstairs, he said. Clara laughed under her breath. Not out of humor, out of disbelief. Do they ever? They reached a door at the end of the corridor, unmarked, gray, forgettable. Mason pressed his badge to the reader. Green light, heavy click. The door opened. Clara hesitated. This country, the people who believed in me. But somewhere along the way, I started fighting for the version of me I thought they wanted, not the one I actually was. Eleanor didn't interrupt. She knew the power of silence. I listened to the wrong voices, McKellen continued, chased the wrong battles, and now Slate of all people hands me a draft that feels more honest than anything I've said in 5 years. He paused. You know what's worse? His voice cracked. It feels like the first time someone actually saw me. Eleanor's eyes softened. Jordan didn't offer you a speech, McKellen. He offered you a mirror. He sank into the chair across from her, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. There's something else, he whispered. Something he had told no one. 3 months ago, before everything escalated, I drafted my own resignation. He swallowed. I never finished it, but I started. Eleanor blinked, caught off guard for the first time that night. You? Why didn't you tell anyone? Because admitting I wanted out felt like failure. His throat tightened, and I've spent my entire career pretending I never fail. Eleanor leaned closer. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. McKellen, leaving isn't failure. Staying for the wrong reasons is. He looked up, eyes raw, exhausted, human. Slate wants me to detonate something. The party wants me to stay silent. The media wants a story. The system wants obedience. He shook his head. But what do I want? Eleanor answered gently. That's the one question no one can manipulate. He sat back, breathing hard. The weight in the room shifted, as if some invisible force loosened its grip. For the first time in days, McKellen didn't look hunted. He looked awake. I need to speak to Slate, he said. Eleanor nodded. He's downstairs. McKellen stood, walked toward the hallway, and placed his hand on the stair railing, but paused. What if I'm making a mistake? Eleanor's voice was calm, steady, grounding. Then make a mistake you can live with, not one someone else writes for you. He closed his eyes, and something inside him, something quiet and tired, but undeniably alive, finally answered. He descended the stairs. At the bottom, Jordan Slate was waiting, not smiling, not pushing, just watching him with the stillness of a man who knew this moment was bigger than politics, bigger than leverage, bigger than strategy. McKellen stepped onto the last stair. "I've made my decision," he said. Slate raised an eyebrow. "And?" McKellen inhaled. The answer, whichever one it was, felt like the beginning of the rest of his life. The first warning wasn't loud. It was subtle, almost polite. A late-night memo, a missing signature, a door left cracked open in a hallway that was always locked. Small things, forgettable things, unless you were looking, and someone was. A junior analyst, quiet, pale, barely noticed, had stumbled across a pattern hidden in the noise. He didn't understand it, but he felt it. The way you feel a storm before the first thunder. You know this feeling, when something simple suddenly isn't. The analyst tried to report it. 3 emails, 2 calls, 1 attempt to knock on an office door.